My name is Graham Foster, and until this morning, I was the Chief Financial Officer of Hartwell Components, a legacy manufacturing firm based in St. Louis, Missouri. I'm 60 and I joined the company when it was still a family-run operation clinging to its last hopes of relevance. 15 years later, we'd gone public, expanded to 10 facilities, and posted our strongest quarter in company history. I didn't do it with flair or fancy slogans. I did it with consistency, clean books, reliable forecasts, and knowing the difference between long-term vision and short-term noise. Then came Brandon Keller, 37, sharp suit, sharper tongue, Harvard MBA, 3 years at a tech firm that collapsed under its own hype, and suddenly our new CEO. The board said we needed a fresh direction, someone who understood modern leadership. I knew what that meant. The writing had been on the wall since Brandon started skipping our one-on-ones and bringing in strategic consultants with polished smiles and zero operational knowledge. Yesterday, his assistant scheduled a meeting with me, 10:30 sharp, corner office. Graham, he said, all confidence and cologne were pivoting. He propped his designer shoes on the edge of the table. You've been incredible, but the next phase of Hartwell needs someone who can speak the language of fintech, agility, disruption. Of course, I said, because I knew better than to argue with a man who had already written the ending. When does the transition start? In 2 weeks, he replied, sounding surprised at how calmly I took it. We'll announce it at the quarterly board meeting. I didn't bother finishing the coffee I brought into the room. By 4 p.m., I'd packed my things into a single cardboard box. The office I'd spent 15 years building, from paper files to a full-scale cloud finance operation, reduced to family photos, a few industry awards, and the fountain pen my wife bought me for our 25th anniversary. On my way out, I nodded at Sandra from accounts receivable. Her expression flickered with something like guilt. I didn't stop at the exit. I didn't ask for a farewell speech or a plaque. What no one knew, not Brandon, not the board, not even Sandra, was that I'd been quietly keeping a side ledger for months. At first, it was just minor inconsistencies, double-billed vendors, innovation fees with no contracts attached, curious reallocations from the compliance budget, the sort of red flags that don't wave, just twitch. I didn't go looking for trouble. Trouble came to me, dressed in Italian suits and armed with buzzwords. And while they celebrated disruption, I documented it. At home that night, I sat on my porch, bourbon in hand, the Mississippi skyline dim behind the haze. I thought about my father, an accountant from Peoria, who taught me that numbers tell the truth when people don't. And I realized I wasn't done yet, not by a long shot, because I wasn't going to fight them in the boardroom. I was going to beat them on the balance sheet. 2 weeks after my departure, I received a text from Martin Delaney, one of the sharpest analysts left on the finance team. Check email, it read. I hadn't expected to hear from anyone at Hartwell so soon, but there it was. Forwarded internal documentation flagged as urgent and off record. One of the invoices caught my eye immediately. $186,000 paid to a consulting firm I'd never heard of, Kitebridge Analytics, for digital growth alignment strategy. No report attached, no approval chain, and dated just a week after Brandon's first executive meeting. I pulled up the credentials for my emergency admin access, something I'd set up during my final days under the guise of system transition backups. Standard protocol, completely above board. No one ever checks them. Over the next 48 hours, I immersed myself in Hartwell's ledgers. What I found didn't just unsettle me, it clarified everything. There were layers, dozens of small dispersed payments routed to shell companies with innocuous names like Gray Line Ventures, NovaPath, and Delta North Solutions. None of them had contracts. None of them had service delivery files. And all of them funneled through accounts recently reassigned to Brandon's strategy and innovation team, a group of 20-somethings more fluent in crypto memes than cash flow modeling. And behind it all, one recurring name kept popping up in digital signatures and approval tags. Evan Carr. I'd met Evan once at the quarterly meet and greet. He was introduced as Brandon's financial modernization advisor. Mid-30s, slick, seemed more interested in the appetizers than the financial discussion. I remembered shaking his hand and immediately checking my wallet. As I traced the timelines further, the patterns sharpened. Payments to Grayline began 2 weeks before Evan officially joined the company. Delta North was incorporated just 10 days before Brandon's announcement as CEO. And Kitebridge? Registered out of Delaware. Delaware. No active website with a mailing address that led to a co-working space in Manhattan. These weren't coincidences, they were signatures. I documented everything. Created mirrored spreadsheets, backed up transaction logs, saved screenshots of email chains and Slack messages. I even pulled archived employee profiles and pieced together LinkedIn trails. Who had worked with whom, where, and when. The deeper I went, the clearer it became. Hartwell wasn't just being modernized. It was being stripped down from the inside. Still, I knew that screaming fraud too early would backfire. No one listens to the ex-employee with an axe to grind, especially one branded too traditional for the new era. I needed allies, quiet ones, people still on the inside who remembered when our books actually meant something. I reached out to Sandra cautiously. We met at an old diner off Jefferson Avenue, neutral ground. She looked tired, like she hadn't slept well in weeks. I've seen the invoices, she said before I could speak, and the pressure to backdate approvals. You kept copies? She nodded. They think I'm just a clerk. Good, I said. They've underestimated the wrong people. That night, I returned home with a flash drive full of files and something else I hadn't felt since Patricia passed. Purpose. Hartwell wasn't going down without a fight. Not on my watch. The next morning, I spread the contents of Sandra's flash drive across my desk like pieces of a jigsaw puzzle. Invoices, approval chains, altered timestamps, and a spreadsheet she'd quietly maintained, titled Red Flags, Internal Only. It listed over 60 transactions, most under $200,000, just below the threshold that required board-level approval. A smart tactic, small enough to fly under the radar, frequent enough to siphon real money. It was the same pattern I'd observed in early April, only now the scope was larger and unmistakable. I started building timelines. Evan Carr's first appearance in the system as a contracted advisor was dated February 2nd, 13 days before Brandon officially introduced him to the executive team. His payroll? Routed through NovaPath, the shell entity registered 3 weeks prior. Sandra had traced 3 other employees being paid through similar channels, none of them listed in the company directory. One, a so-called UX strategist, had an Instagram profile that showed him DJing in Ibiza during the time he was supposedly working on internal analytics tools. But the most damning trail wasn't digital. It came from the warehouse team. I drove out to Hartwell's main facility in Covington, the very same building I'd helped finance a decade ago during our expansion phase. Outside the break room, I spotted Jared, a line supervisor I'd known since he was fresh out of trade school. Rick? He blinked. Heard they gave you a raw deal. Water under the bridge, I said. But I need your help. Quietly. I showed him a list of vendors Hartwell had supposedly sourced new inventory software from. Swift Rack Systems, Polar Logics. Jared frowned. We never got anything from these names. Still using the same legacy platform. And the barcode scanner upgrades? Nope. Maintenance team's been fighting with old gear for months. I thanked him, then asked a final question. Has anyone from Brandon's team been around asking about facility expenses? He hesitated, then nodded. That guy with the tight haircut, Evan, right? He toured the floor with a clipboard, asked about our energy consumption and throughput. Didn't say much, took a lot of pictures. It fit. Fake modernization initiatives, untraceable payments, paperwork for projects that never happened. And the kicker? When I cross-referenced Jared's inventory reports with finance's depreciation schedules, the company was claiming accelerated write-offs on non-existent equipment. Back at home, I updated my document archive, organizing evidence by department: facilities, finance, procurement, and HR. The total embezzled? Roughly $9.3 million, at least based on what I'd verified so far, and it was likely just the surface. Still, it wasn't enough to go public. Not yet. My goal wasn't to burn the whole company to the ground. It was to protect the people who were still hanging on inside. Like Sandra, like Jared, and like Bethany, who texted me late that night. They just cut our team in half, said we're overstaffed for the new direction. It was clear. Brandon and Evan weren't just bleeding Hartwell for cash. They were replacing the soul of the company with a hollow shell. Style over substance, optics over operations. So I made a decision. No press, no lawsuits, not yet. I was going to find someone on the board who still remembered what real numbers looked like. And then I was going to show them everything. Not with a headline, with the truth laid out line by line, just the way I was taught. 2 days later, I found myself sitting across from Renee Hollister, Hartwell's longest-serving board member and former COO, before she semi-retired to advise from the vineyard. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of Lexington, far enough from the office buzz, close enough for her to feel in control. She arrived exactly on time, hair tied back, blazer crisp, eyes sharper than ever. Rick Donnelly, she said, sliding into the booth. I heard you went out quiet. That's not like you. I smiled, folding my hands. I didn't see the point in a scene, but I think you'll agree that what's happening now deserves one. I handed her a flash drive. She raised an eyebrow but didn't hesitate. Slipped it into her bag without even looking at the label. I'll read it tonight, she said. Why now? Because we're on the edge of something irreversible. Brandon and his protege are cutting the floor out from under us and wrapping it in language like optimization and future readiness. But the numbers, they don't lie. She took a sip of tea and tilted her head. You think he's stealing? I think he's running Hartwell like a private asset fund, stripping, flipping, and inflating value with smoke. And if he's not stopped, in 6 months we won't have anything left to fix. She didn't speak for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. I had doubts. His reports are slick, but too polished. And I didn't like how fast he moved to push you out. Or Sandra. You still talk to Harold? I asked, referring to Hartwell's founder and her old partner. She exhaled. Every week, he's devastated. Thought Brandon would be the bridge to the next generation. Now he won't even take his calls. That was the opening I needed. I don't want headlines. I want accountability, I said. We need a small, verified coalition. Someone from finance. Someone from the board. One internal ally who's still inside the wire. Renee nodded again. I'll back you, but only if we do this clean. If we go to the full board, we need more than red flags. We need a report they can't ignore. And someone from legal to verify the trail. I've got names and backup files, I said. Sandra is still inside, quietly watching. And Bethany just filed a formal inquiry under whistleblower protections. It triggered an internal review. Small, but it's a crack. Renee leaned forward, voice low. What about HR? Has Brandon isolated them too? I shook my head. Not entirely. Carlos Ramirez, Deputy Director of Compliance. He's new, but he's sharp. I caught him reviewing access logs on his own initiative. We bring him in, she said decisively, and keep it surgical. Over the next 72 hours, I coordinated with Renee and Sandra via encrypted emails and offline meetings. Sandra verified transaction chains. Renee reviewed them line by line and began drafting a preliminary report for audit oversight. Carlos, after 2 careful meetings, agreed to flag inconsistencies without alerting the executive team. Our goal wasn't just exposure, it was structural prevention. This isn't a scandal yet, Renee said on our final prep call, but it's a blueprint for collapse. Then we make sure the foundation holds, I said. The plan was simple, a sealed report submitted simultaneously to 3 trusted board members, routed through legal and corroborated by Sandra's flagged transactions. It would land like a thunderclap. And if we timed it right, it would arrive before Brandon's next investor showcase, before he could dazzle them with numbers we knew were fiction. This wasn't revenge, it was rescue. The report landed on a Wednesday morning, precisely at 9:00 a.m., in the inboxes of 3 board members. Elaine Draper, head of the audit committee, Marcus Lynn, who had been skeptical of Brandon's strategic realignments, and Renee, of course, who had co-authored the submission. Within 10 minutes, Marcus forwarded it to legal. By 10 a.m., I received a message from Sandra. Carlos just walked out of the compliance office with the GC. Brandon's office door is shut. Everyone's rattled. At 11:27 a.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. Rick Donnelly? Yes. This is Elaine Draper. I've just read your report. Silence. It's not what I expected. I didn't expect you to call, I replied evenly. I've known Brandon for 15 years, she continued. He's smart, charismatic. But if even half of this holds up, it all holds up, I said, cross-referenced, verified. She paused again. Then, we've called an emergency audit committee meeting. Tonight, you'll be there. Of course. By 5:00 p.m., I was seated at the long oak table inside Hartwell's secondary boardroom, across from Elaine, Marcus, Renee, and the general counsel, David Sandler. My evidence, now neatly collated into folders and printed binders, lay before each of them. Elaine tapped one file. These vendor shells, Altera Dynamics, Vertex Consultants, even Innovex Solutions, they're all linked? Yes, I said, through shared agents, tax IDs, or registered addresses. All routed through a Delaware holding company Brandon helped structure 2 months before his hiring. And the payouts? Over $9.7 million in his strategic consulting fees and market positioning costs, none of which yielded tangible deliverables, all within a 16-month window. David leaned forward. We cross-checked the payments with the internal project logs. There are no approvals. In some cases, the department heads didn't even know these vendors were engaged. Marcus let out a slow whistle. And Zachary Hughes, a key facilitator, I said. He authorized most transfers. He also has historical ties to at least two of the entities. Hidden well, but not deeply. Elaine closed her binder. This meeting is now on record. We'll present our findings to the full board tomorrow morning. Renee looked at me across the table. You sure you don't want to lead the presentation? No, I replied. My job was to tell the story. Yours is to decide what to do with it. That night, I stood outside the building in the cool air, watching the Hartwell logo gleam against the sky. I wasn't angry. I wasn't nervous. I just felt resolved. The next morning's board meeting was closed door, but I didn't need to be inside to feel the aftershocks. At 9:42 a.m., Sandra texted, Zach escorted out. Brandon asked to step outside for a call, never came back. By noon, news broke across industry networks. Hartwell Corp. initiates forensic review, following financial irregularities. The press spun it as due diligence. But inside, we knew. The system had cracked, not from rage or vengeance, but from truth. Neatly filed, verified, delivered with quiet force. It didn't take long for the fallout to spread. By the end of that week, Hartwell Corp. had released a formal statement confirming that an internal investigation into specific financial practices was underway, citing a need for transparency, trust restoration, and organizational integrity. It was a polished way of saying, we've been compromised and we got caught. Brandon Keller was placed on administrative leave pending further review. Within 2 days, he cleaned out his office. No farewell speech, no thank you email. He exited the building through the back, avoiding eye contact with the people who had once clapped when he spoke at quarterly town halls. Zachary Hughes didn't get the same courtesy. On Friday afternoon, while the finance team gathered for a budget planning session, 2 corporate security officers entered the conference room and quietly escorted him out. He didn't even take his laptop. Word spread fast. By Monday, HR was working overtime managing restructuring notices. Most of Brandon's hires, those brought in under the veil of innovation, either resigned voluntarily or were let go. Sandra texted me that morning. Whole corridor smells like panic and expensive cologne. But the bigger wave was just beginning. The forensic auditors, a private team brought in from Washington, set up a war room in the executive wing. For the first time in months, no one was above scrutiny. Department heads were called in. Vendor contracts were reviewed line by line. Asset logs were re-verified. One by one, the fraudulent shells collapsed under their own weight. What surprised me wasn't how quickly the truth unraveled. It was how many people had noticed signs but never connected the dots. A procurement manager had flagged odd pricing structures. A junior accountant noticed duplicate invoices. Even an intern had once asked why Vertex Solutions didn't have a real website. But no one wanted to believe something was wrong. Not when the leadership team was smiling, hitting targets, and talking about digital evolution in every boardroom. I didn't return to the office during this storm. Instead, I worked from my kitchen in Asheville, checking in when needed, providing clarification when asked. My priority was not revenge, but stability. So when Elaine Draper called and asked if I'd consider stepping in, temporarily as interim financial integrity advisor, I said yes, under one condition: autonomy. I wouldn't take orders from what was left of Brandon's cabinet. I'd report only to the audit committee, and I'd have direct access to legal and compliance. She agreed without hesitation. Back in the building, I sat down with Bethany and Kevin. Kevin looked sheepish. I'm sorry, he said. I froze. You protected your family, I said. That's not weakness. That's survival. Bethany smiled faintly. What now? Now, I said, we rebuild this house, beam by beam, number by number. Because that's the thing about corruption. It spreads fast in silence, but it dies in the light. Walking back through the front doors of Hartwell Corp. after months away felt surreal. The same marble floors, the same elevator chime. Only now the silence carried a different weight. The hush wasn't fear. It was reflection. I took the long way to my temporary office on the 7th floor, passing by departments that once buzzed with nervous ambition under Brandon's reign. Now they hummed with something quieter: intentionality. My first meeting was with the newly restructured executive team. Elaine Draper sat at the head of the table, flanked by Anthony West from compliance and David Lynn from legal. Their faces were drawn but focused. This won't be a fast fix, Elaine said, setting a thick folder on the table. But it will be a real one. I opened the folder to review the proposals. Stricter vendor vetting procedures, a 2-tier approval process for consultant contracts, mandatory quarterly financial ethics training for all senior managers. It's a good start, I said, nodding. But procedures won't mean anything if the culture doesn't change. Anthony leaned forward. What would that take, in your opinion? I didn't hesitate. You need more people who care about doing the job right, even when no one's watching. Over the next 6 weeks, I worked closely with HR and finance to identify those people. Folks like Sandra in procurement, who had quietly refused to process a questionable invoice last quarter. Or Jamal, a junior accountant, who'd flagged a vendor discrepancy and was told to just let it go. I made it clear. From now on, speaking up wasn't just allowed, it was expected. We restructured key teams not based on titles, but on integrity and performance. We brought back old talent who'd been sidelined by Brandon's ego. Bethany was promoted to controller, and Kevin, after some hesitation, accepted the role of director of internal controls under a team not reporting to the CFO, but to the audit committee directly. For the first time in a long while, I saw a different kind of leadership emerging. Not loud, not flashy, but solid, grounded, familiar. One afternoon, while reviewing a new compliance dashboard with the IT team, Bethany knocked on the door. "You've got a visitor," she said with a small smile. I stepped into the hallway and saw Harold Phillips, Meridian's original founder, waiting near the elevator. His posture was slightly bent now, age having caught up with him, but his handshake was as firm as ever. "Had to see it for myself," he said. "They told me you were back." "Just temporarily," I said. Harold glanced around. "Funny, the air feels honest again." We sat in my office for over an hour talking about where the company had been and where it could still go. He listened as I shared how far the corruption had spread, but also how many good people were still fighting for something better. As he left, he paused at the doorway. "You built the bones of this place, Rick," he said. "But now you've reminded everyone that bones mean nothing without a spine." He walked away, leaving me alone with my thoughts and the quiet realization that we hadn't just exposed something rotten. We'd planted something new, and it was finally starting to grow. 6 months later, I sat on the wraparound porch of my small home in Asheville, North Carolina, coffee in hand, watching the golden light spill over the Blue Ridge Mountains. My time with Hartwell Corp had officially ended a few weeks ago. The board had offered me a permanent position, senior ethics and oversight advisor, but I turned it down. I'd done what I came to do. The rest needed to come from within. Bethany called last week. She was settling well into her new role and told me the culture was genuinely shifting. "People feel like they can breathe again," she said. That mattered more than any title. What I'd realized through it all was this: your legacy isn't in the plaques on your wall or your name on a building. It's in how people feel when they speak your name. Is it fear or is it trust? The greatest satisfaction didn't come from watching Zachary escorted out or Travis being removed. It came from knowing that Hartwell's young analysts now had a department they could believe in. That someone like Jamal wouldn't be silenced or punished for doing the right thing. And maybe, just maybe, my late wife Patricia would have been proud to see that I'd finally learned the lesson she tried to teach me for years. That protecting the truth isn't about being loud. It's about being consistent, even when no one's watching. We live in a world that often rewards flashover foundation, but every house built on sand eventually falls. Quiet builders like us, we're the ones who keep it standing. So what's next for me? Last month, I started volunteering part-time at a local nonprofit, helping small family-run businesses get their books in order. Clean, simple accounting. No politics. Just helping good people stay afloat in a world that often forgets them. Someone asked me last week if I missed the power, the high-stakes decisions. I told them I never chased power, I chased peace. And here, surrounded by trees, books, and the quiet hum of the real world, I'd finally found it. Because in the end, success isn't just about what you build. It's about what you protect. And I'll always choose integrity over applause, every single time.